Looks like we only have 26 out of 101 attendees so far.
27.
27. Hello. Thank you for joining the Community Orchard Network for our 5th meeting on urban orchards. My name is Nina Beth Carden, Director of the Baltimore Orchard Project, and I will be today's moderator. The Community Orchard Network is an online interest group that meets monthly to provide practitioners and would-be practitioners of urban orchards and food forests an opportunity to advance the knowledge, conduct, and impact of urban agroforestry. This is an open forum run through a Google group, which you are now all a part of, which is hosted by the Alliance for Community Trees, and we are very grateful to them for their management and administration of this group. This is the place to post questions, get resources, and find out about future meetings. And if you know of anyone else who might be interested in joining the group, please invite them to contact orchard@actrees.org, and that email will be at the end of the webinar as well. We are recording this for future reference and archiving, so folks who might not be able to be joining us right now or might be coming in late will be able to catch all of the webinar. We're delighted to welcome today 2 wonderful presenters. Eric Tonsmeyer, who will present first, is the award-winning author of Paradise Lot, 2 Plant Geeks, 1/10 of an Acre, and the Making of an Edible Garden Oasis in the City. And Eric, I am halfway through the book, and it's both a fascinating book, informative and delightful. And Perennial Vegetables, from Artichokes to Zucchini Taro, a gardener's guide to over 100 delicious and easy-to-grow edibles. Eric clearly likes long titles. And the co-author of Edible Forest Gardens. Eric is an appointed lecturer at Yale University and an international trainer, presenting in both English and Spanish throughout North and Central America. His latest book, Carbon Farming, a global toolkit for stabilizing the climate with tree crops and regenerative agricultural practices, will be released this year, and I, for one, we're going to be lining up to be one of the first people to get it and read it. He'll be speaking to us today about edible forest gardens, an agricultural form he's been experimenting with, refining, and continually growing for 20 years. Josh Singer will present to us during the second half hour. He's the DC Parks and Recreation Community Garden Specialist and works on creating new community gardens and urban agricultural projects throughout DC. He also develops and manages garden support systems, such as his Urban Garden Workshop Series, a citywide compost network, a garden tool share, and a greenhouse cooperative. Josh is also a certified ISA arborist, and he'll tell us what that means, hopefully. He draws on his experiences as a former teacher and community organizer to develop and support food justice strategies throughout DC. We are delighted to have both Eric and Josh with us today. So Eric will present the first half hour or so. We will be entertaining questions after each presentation. You will see to the right on your screen a questions box. Please do feel free to put questions there. We generally do not get to answer all of the questions while we're on the air, so we do try to answer them through the Google group afterwards. And at this point, Eric, I am delighted to turn the mic over to you.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks very much for having me. This is the subject of urban fruit trees is near and dear to my heart. In addition to writing and gardening at home, I've been involved in urban agriculture projects here in my city for about 20 years now. So planted a lot of pawpaw trees in urban gardens all over the city here, for example. So let's see, we want to get my first slide up there. I see changes happening. Great. Well, while we're waiting for that to come up, I'll just say that I'm not here to teach this group how to grow fruit trees in the city. Obviously, people have already got that worked out. Really the framing of what I'm talking about is how we can add, what can we add, how can we add value to the fruit trees we have? How can we add other companions for them? that will help them and help other parts of our gardens? And how can we get additional food in the shade beneath and between them? And how can we diversify the diet from perennials that we have? I'm still finding that the screen is just showing the first opening image.
Eric, you have keyboard and mouse controls, so whenever
Oh, I
you're
just
ready, you can
pressed the button. Look at that. Oh, well. All right. Well, great. Well, then let's go on ahead. I'm not the master of technical things. I know my plant's pretty good. That's about all I can say for that. So we're talking about sort of how to turn an orchard into an ecosystem, if you will, and provide benefits, additional benefits, additional food, and some other impacts that can help. And often I find that urban orchards may be taking place on the edges of community gardens, and a lot of the things we'll be talking about here can also have an impact sort of 50 or 100 feet away in terms of pest control, for example. So, so looking at definitions, what is an edible forest garden? We're really looking at trying to create an edible ecosystem. We're trying to draw from looking at what works in a forest. When you look at a forest, usually there's no one out there weeding it and doing pest control on it and fertilizing it and watering it. It more or less takes care of itself. And we would like to be able to have food production systems that take care of themselves as much as possible, that are somewhat self-maintaining. So we're looking to create an edible ecosystem that works in ways that functions like a forest, that's structured like a forest, that evolves over time like a forest. We're emphasizing perennial plants like fruits and other perennial food plants that's generally low maintenance, and we're looking to provide more than just food, but also increased soil building and organic matter and water retention and habitat for beneficial insects and other elements like that that come with these more forest-like structures. Let's see, where's my button? There we go. And this is not a new idea at all, and it's certainly not something that Dave and I invented in the 1990s or that came out of permaculture, although it's been associated with the permaculture movement. This kind of food production system, agroecologists call it the tropical home garden, is the tropical version, or they talk about them as multi-strata agroforestry systems. It really goes back thousands of years. In Indonesia, it goes back 13,000 years or more. And all around the world, in the tropics, we see these complex, multi-layered food forest systems where you have, as you can see in the little drawing there, taller trees and then some shorter trees underneath, and then shrubs under there, maybe some vines climbing on things, and some shade-tolerant herbs and ground covers beneath. Often some small livestock are integrated in there as well in these traditional systems. So really what we're trying to do is just work out how to do this in a colder climate. And there are so many kinds of foods that we can produce on perennial plants. Yes, we can grow lots of fruits and berries, and those are excellent, fantastic, wonderful things. There are also, for these colder climates, some very nice nuts that can be grown. Often the nut trees are too big for a small urban garden. Even chestnuts are pretty big, but hazelnuts fit very well. There are some dwarf nut pines, or pine nuts, that are a good size. And there's one called yellowhorn that's a very nice, maybe like a 12 or 15-foot tree, which I think is really appropriate for smaller gardens. We have lots and lots of perennial vegetables. A lot of us are only familiar with, asparagus and rhubarb and maybe Jerusalem artichokes, but there's a good, I have in my garden here at home, for example, about 70 different species of perennial leaves alone. And then I have perennial broccolis, and I have perennial root crops and other things. There's lots and lots and lots of these. With leaves and stalks and shoots and flower buds. I do love the perennial broccolis especially. And those are things we can really take advantage of. And then there's a number of tea and culinary plants, from sort of traditional things like oregano or thyme, all the way to hardy relatives of Szechuan pepper, and hardy relatives of star anise and some other more interesting kind of fun exotic stuff. Some hardy relatives of gingers, for example, that can grow in USDA Zone 7 or even USDA Zone 6. So there's quite a palette. Certainly it's not going to replace annual crops like winter squash or tomatoes or basil or anything like that, but it really is quite a rich diversity of perennial crops we have to choose from. For the Edible Forest Gardens book, there's over 600 species of useful perennials that we profile in there, for example. So moving on, we're also looking not just at what direct things we can get like food and some of the other products for people's use, but also the different kinds of functions, the roles they can play. One of those that's really important is nitrogen fixing plants. In urban soils in particular, fertility is often very poor. Nitrogen is often really a limiting nutrient, and there's all these plants that fix nitrogen very effectively on their own, which we know because we know the beans do that. We know that annual cover crops do that. With perennial nitrogen fixers, it's a little bit different. With an annual, like a cover crop, let's say, you want to till that in and allow the nitrogen to decompose from the dying plant material. But with perennial nitrogen fixers, over time that nitrogen becomes available to the neighboring plants. Basically these plants make free fertilizer. Some of them also are very lovely ornamentals. In the photo there is dwarf false indigo. That's flowering in my garden right now, and it's just this, today, and it's really, really stunningly beautiful. And it's also rated as a really excellent plant for beneficial insects. So it's beautiful, it makes fertilizer, and it's excellent for pest control. So that's really a win-win-win. Our next category is insect nectary plants. These are plants that, like the false indigo we were looking at there, that attract beneficial insects. In the top left image there, you can see a tomato hornworm, which is a pretty vicious pest of tomatoes in particular and other members of that family. And if you look on the back, it has all these little white things. Those are the cocoons of the pupae of a braconid wasp, which is the insect in the bottom left there. And there's thousands of different species of these parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs in other organisms. So one of these wasps had previously laid its eggs in that caterpillar. They hatch out inside the caterpillar. They eat it from the inside, consuming, all the least vital parts first to make it stay alive as long as possible. And then when it's finally been consumed, they chew their way out and they make these little cocoons. And then when they come out of those cocoons as some very small adult wasps, they don't eat caterpillars. The adults drink nectar. And they don't like just any old flower. They don't have a long tongue like a butterfly or a hummingbird. They need easy access flowers. And we found that the aster family, anything that looks like a daisy and anything that looks like Queen Anne's lace, the Apiaceae and Asteraceae families are two of the very best. And there's a really nice new book on this called Farming with Native Beneficial Insects from the Xerces Society. That's Farming with Native Beneficial Insects. That is a really lovely book, and it goes through different ways to incorporate these plants at the farm and garden scale, and gives lists of species by climate type. So for the Northeast, for the Southeast, for the Midwest, and so on. It's a really, really lovely book. One of the anchors that we like to try and include for habitat function and for beneficial organisms is planting native species, whatever kind of definition of that you choose to use. In this case, this is a beach plum, which is one of our eastern native plums. An absolutely wonderful, very nice fruit. A good variety of it is very nice. And we rush to find all these cool plants from other places far away from where we live, but there are all these really marvelous native plants wherever we may live in the United States. Wherever anybody is living on this call, there are some really wonderful native plants, native fruits, native perennial vegetables, native nitrogen-fixing plants, native beneficial insect plants, and so on. It would be a shame for us to overlook them for their food value, but also they tend to, I have the feeling, and when there's certainly research that points out that some of them have very strongly established relationships with the fungi and the soil organisms and the pollinators and so on in our area, so they can help to provide an anchor. Although I certainly don't only grow native species, and I would suggest that an all-native edible garden is very interesting educationally, but it's not the most rich, delicious diet, since a lot of these things aren't really properly domesticated yet. Then there are some other habitat elements that can be included above and beyond the nectar. So dead wood is really excellent. A water element, in this case, that's just a kiddie pool. That pond is just a kiddie pool with some aquatic vegetables growing in it and a couple of goldfish to control mosquitoes. And that really brings so much life that helps with the pest control. And even really in the heart of the city, it's amazing all the beneficial insects that can show up in that kind of a situation. Another thing people will do is plant some extra berries, like extra mulberries, for the birds, because many of the birds, almost all of the birds that consume berries also consume insects. Almost all of our songbirds eat both insects and fruit and seeds, so it's helpful to plant some extras of those. And finally, people are doing this thing now called an insect hotel. There's a little tiny one in the top corner there. The dead stalks of plants are very useful habitat for those beneficial insects and also for a lot of the native pollinators. And people are now making big stacks of like some empty bamboo and some wood, like some big pieces of lumber with holes drilled in them, and some little straw blocks and some dead stalks. And in a little corner like that, or a little tower, they can be pretty sculptural, provides really excellent habitat for those beneficial organisms that can help so much with pest control. And what I can say in our garden here, or our garden in the city here, is that these techniques have basically mean we have no aphid problems to speak of. We have no caterpillar problems to speak of, but they haven't done much at all for slugs, and they haven't done much at all for beetles. So it helps eliminate some categories. Spider mites, it's helped with those really well. But there are some categories of pests that this does not help with. But any degree to which we can have less pest control is good as far as I'm concerned. And also habitat for things that don't help us with pest control is still nice. It's nice to have some little oases in the city. Then we look at the mushrooms, and I think this is an area that a lot of gardeners have not explored as thoroughly as we can. One nice thing about growing mushrooms is that they can grow in full shade. So in terms of growing under your fruit trees, this is a really great choice. Some of them will grow on logs, like shiitake and oyster mushrooms are particularly easy to do with that. You have to drill holes in the logs and hammer in the plugs and wax them over. It's a little bit of a pain. But they're delicious and they produce for many years. Another option is the one that's in this photo. These are Stropharia mushrooms, or garden giant, they're sometimes called, or wine cap. And they grow on wood chips. And wood chips are super easy to get in a city. They're part of the urban waste stream. And this particular kind of mushrooms, you just want to get some pretty fresh wood chips. You buy in the spawn, which you can order from a number of places online. You mix that into the wood chips, and then you water it, and you have a pile of wood chips in the shade, or even just wood chip mulch under your fruit trees in the shade of them. And if it stays moist enough, like if there's a little irrigation there, or if it's not in too dry and exposed a spot, the next year you get a really lovely crop of these really, really large and delicious mushrooms. And with this particular species, Stropharia, you can actually take the sort of stump of the mushroom and replant those in more fresh wood chips, and they'll continue to go year to year. So it's absolutely the easiest mushroom to grow of any of them. And I find that the perennial vegetables we have are great. We have eggs from our chickens as well, but when we can add mushrooms to that as well, it's just a really fantastic. It expands the culinary opportunities. It makes omelets much more interesting, and so on. Let's see our next. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about foods for partial shade, things that you can produce in part shade in the city on a relatively small piece of land. In the top there we have some fruits and nuts. The first is the pawpaw, which is a really, really phenomenal native fruit tree. It's native from New York and Michigan down to Georgia, and sort of out to the edge of the forest there around the Mississippi area. Grows out into the Ozarks. It likes partial shade. It actually prefers some shade. We have them here growing on the north side of the house, and they produce extremely well. It's related to a lot of tropical fruits. So if there's folks involved in your orchard project, or gardeners or folks running your programs who are from the tropics almost anywhere, they'll know the guanabana or corazon or chirimoya or sour apple or custard apple or soursop are all members of the same family as the pawpaw. So we've had great luck in the Puerto Rican community here in town. People really love them and appreciate them. And I've also found the pawpaw grows extremely well in crushed buildings. It loves urban soils, just really, really likes those well-drained urban soils with a lot of brick and asphalt and stuff in there. It does very well. We also have the dwarf kiwi. There is a very full-size hardy kiwi. This is Actinidia colomitica, the super hardy kiwi, or Arctic beauty kiwi they call it, which loves partial shade and is very productive. We have gooseberries, and all the gooseberries, currants, josta berries produce really well in the shade. And anybody down to about through, let's say, USDA Zone 7, those are a really great choice. And the red and white currants, really in full shade, are very productive. If you're farther south than that, I would recommend a species called the Chilean guava, Ugni Malini, which is a really lovely, really delicious fruit that's hardy to, say, Zone 8 or maybe Zone 7, and then farther south from there is, again, a full shade, like a small berry for full shade on a bush. And then we have hazelnuts, which apparently actually prefer light shade and certainly can produce well in part shade. And they're relatively small. Some of them are pretty big. Most of the varieties that are out there are going to grow maybe 10 or 12 feet tall, so they could fit well under a full-size tree or in a partial shade area where some buildings are providing some shade. On our bottom row, we have some perennial vegetables. There's, for partial shade, there's Turkish rocket, and both Turkish rocket and sea kale are really nice perennial vegetables that have excellent broccolis. And believe it or not, they've already passed their season now. They're like an early May perennial broccoli, and where I am in Massachusetts, regular broccoli isn't coming in until maybe late July, so it's nice to have some really early vegetables there. And both of those are also species that can handle a lot of very dry conditions and excessively well-drained urban soils. The next one, that heart-shaped leaf, is climbing spinach or Caucasian spinach, which is one from the Caucasus Mountains of Eurasia. And in the spring, it makes a really nice, like asparagus type shoot. And then after that, it makes these really lovely heart-shaped leaves, let's say into mid-June here in Massachusetts. Very nice perennial vegetable. It's a vine, so it's somewhat of a climbing or sprawling vine, and it likes part shade. The next one with all the little roots on it is called skirret. That's a very nice perennial vegetable. It's sort of like a perennial parsnip. Great, I see 5 more minutes, no problem. That one has excellent roots and nice young leaves, and also the flowers attract beneficial insects. Finally, we have groundnut, which is one of our native tuber crops. It fixes nitrogen, has edible tubers, and that's a climber as well. It has pretty flowers. It's a climber, loves to climb on like a chain link fence or a wrought iron fence. Then for full shade, we have the red and white currants there. Those are really for full shade, and a few other things. We got mushrooms. There's a shiitake log on the bottom. The one that looks sort of like a leek is called ramps. That's one of our wild leeks for full shade. Next to it is a native wasabi called toothwort. That's a really one. The leaves taste like watercress, and the roots are a strong wasabi. And then we have the fiddlehead. Fiddlehead ferns for moist shade are a really nice choice. And here's some of the resources if you're interested in this kind of production. If you have an orchard already, it's very easy to sort of just add this in to build on to what you already have. Gaia's Garden is probably the best overview to all these practices. There's this various forest gardening books there, me and Dave's book, and then Martin Crawford's book actually can be a better place for a lot of folks to start creating a forest garden. Lee Reich's Landscaping with Fruit, I think, is fantastic. Then there is my perennial vegetables book. There also, Martin Crawford has a nice book on perennial vegetables. His book, Food from Your Forest Garden, is a great book on cooking and processing fruits and nuts and perennial vegetables and herbs. Mycelium Running is a great one on the mushrooms. And then there's that Farming with Native Beneficial Insects, which I think is a really, really fantastic sort of state-of-the-art for farmers and gardeners on that practice. So we have time for a few questions if people have any questions. But perhaps we don't.
Well, while the questions are coming in, I have a question. People are afraid of mushrooms. So how do you help people get over that fear, and how do we know what's safe and what's not?
Sure. Well, let's see. What worked for me was taking a couple workshops on them and learning that some of them are easily identified, although some are really challenging. And if you're growing one that's easily identified and you're growing it on purpose, and you can recognize the ones that are being grown, so you're not poisoning yourself with a weedy mushroom that snuck into the mix. I found that just getting a chance to observe doing it hands-on is the best way for folks to do it. And some of them are very, very easy to grow, like those Stropharia mushrooms are just very, very simple. And once people get a chance to see how it works and eat the mushrooms, I found people go and have very good luck moving forward from there. And I see we have some other questions. Let's see. Isn't groundnut super aggressive? Yes, it does spread aggressively. And yes, that is annoying. So you want to find a place for it where that's not a problem. Sources for Pawpaw, North Carolina. I do have sources on my website, which is perennialsolutions.org. A question for resources in semi-arid climates. I have a blog on my website, several blogs on my website where I look at species for drier climates. And one of those is a review of a book called High and Dry. And there's also one of perennial vegetables for various climates. So there's lots of good things for semi-arid and temperate, like some of the nopali cactus and jujubes are great choices, and figs are great choices for those kinds of regions. No, most of these species are not easily available at local nurseries, but again, I have a list of nurseries and seed companies at perennialsolutions.org. And yes, Sarah, those perennial vegetables you mentioned do grow well from seed as well as from plants, and you can get those from some of the sources on my website, including places like Oikos Tree Crops and Food Forest Farm. Oh, and I should ask the questions aloud before answering them. Well, if any more come in, I'll do that.
All right. Well, I think that we're just about ready for Josh. So let's see if there are time for maybe one more question if it comes in. Otherwise, Eric, thank you so much, and I encourage everyone to get Eric's books. They are, as I say, chock full of information and just delightful to read. And somehow, with all of the wisdom in there, Eric makes you believe that you too can achieve such magic in your garden. We've got that one last question, Eric, if you want to answer that. You want to say it out loud?
Sure. The last one is to repeat the name of the website, which is perennialsolutions.org. perennialsolutions.org.
Oh, okay. There was one other question, which is that in California, they're experiencing a drought.
Sure.
You recommend trees for managing drought?
Sure. In fact, I'm doing a workshop in California this fall. Well, the first thing is to choose species that can handle very dry conditions. Part of the problem in California is people have been growing things that don't really grow in the desert and just irrigating them a lot. So choices like, again, the jujube, like pomegranate, like olive, carob are often more appropriate than things like the stone fruits and apples and almonds that are more water-loving species. So it's partly just a matter of choosing the things that like it dry in the first place, like grapes also. And depending where you are in California, the nopali the tuna cactus is a really good choice for a very drought-tolerant species as well.
Great, thank you. And for the person who asked about the guilds, that's chock full of information. Eric's books are chock full of information, and some of these other books on the site, on the website right now, that is on the webinar screen right now, have lots of answers about what plants go together in guilds. So please do avail yourselves of that information. So Eric, thank you so much. This is fabulous. We're just indebted to you for using yourself and your home and your garden for experimenting in this field, because we really all are benefiting from it. So, and I know you're having a lot of fun, so that's good too. So thank you for that.
Thanks very much.
All right, and now let me turn this over to Josh, who's been working assiduously in DC to help get the information out to city residents there. So Josh, take it away.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name is Josh Singer. I work for DC Parks and Rec. I'm a community garden specialist, and we work a lot with building new gardens and support systems and workshops and stuff. But we also do a lot of work with creating community orchards and kind of and so today we're not going to talk so much about how to create them, but more like how to organize the community to maintain these orchards and how to keep them engaged. And also previously I worked for a tree nonprofit in DC where we developed a fruit tree program where we ended up we planted about a little over 2 dozen fruit orchards between 10 to 40 trees. Mainly partnered around pre-existing community gardens and school gardens. So we got a chance to kind of learn how these operate and how we can mold these orchards into like the community cooperative kind of system to help maintain them. So we're just going to kind of talk about all the lessons that we learned over that experience and what we're using nowadays. Right. There we go. All right. So, like I mentioned, majority of our orchards. So we probably have about 3 dozen orchards now in DC, and majority of them we planted with pre-existing cooperative government systems, which tend to be with community gardens or school gardens who are already operating and maintaining. They're a group of volunteer community members that are already maintaining these management systems to community gardens. So it's not a whole lot more to kind of incorporate the orchards into their kind of management systems. So basically, you need to we approach these gardens first because we want to get these gardens on board. We have a number of community gardens. We have almost 30 of them right now with DC Parks and Rec, but we want them to be be interested in these gardens and have buy-in first before we go ahead and plant these orchards. So we're looking for people that are interested. So we'll meet with these gardens first, and we'll kind of talk about the maintenance that goes into these gardens. And later in these slides, I developed a kind of a maintenance level system where we talk about different categories where we have low maintenance fruit trees, medium maintenance fruit trees, and high maintenance fruit trees, and we talk about what it entails. And then we see if people are interested in maintaining these gardens and these orchards, and at the same time, what kind of maintenance level they're looking for. Everyone really loves like apples and peaches and things like that, but it could be a lot of maintenance in the urban environment as opposed to planting some pawpaws or figs. So it's kind of like a balance of trying to find out how much they're willing to invest and then choosing the right kind of trees for the right kind of community garden. Then we'll talk about most of these trees just basic like tree planting 101. Most of them need to be supplementally watered at least the first couple of years especially during the summer. So like at least once a week to give them good 5 gallons. So that's something they're going to have to consider. A lot of these gardens have need a lot of weeding, need a lot of mulching. We'll talk about later about different kinds of living mulches that we use that actually really reduces the amount of work instead of like having to re-mulch it every year. So that will help with some of the maintenance. And then we'll talk about depending on what kind of fruit trees they want. We'll talk about the pest and disease maintenance level. levels and pruning and and things going from there. And I'll hopefully try to find the right match of the right fruit trees with the right garden.
Hi, Josh. Sorry to interrupt. Before we continue, could you
Yeah.
could you speak up and slow down your pace a little bit? We're having trouble hearing you.
Okay. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit louder and a little bit slower. Sorry. So as I said, if you didn't hear me on the last slide, we mainly look for pre-existing cooperative governance structures like community gardens that we'll work with. But a lot of times, if there isn't already, say a community wants a fruit orchard but they don't already have a community garden there, we'll help assist them in creating a cooperative system where they a bunch of community members can get together and kind of figure out how to actually maintain this orchard. To actually create a cooperative governance structure, you need to have assigned roles. Like we're going to need managers. Specific, assigned managers and members. So it's verifying, two different roles and then having expectations for each one of these roles. And so the expectations, could be, you need water once a week. You need to, weed once a month. You can have trainings that involve where people actually have to take training to become a member of this community orchard. And then, just having, it really helps to have like a tangible thing for them to read and sign, like some kind of sign agreement, or basically we create bylaws that people are signing on to, as a commitment that they're going to help maintain this orchard. And then you want to create like why are these people helping out with this orchard? You want to create benefits for these people. Not only are they getting shared harvest, it'd be great. I mean, a lot of our gardens, we create a lot of educational opportunities. We have a lot of training programs and apprentices programs where people not only, in exchange for helping us maintain these orchards, they can actually learn how to, learn all about their fruit trees and how to maintain these trees on their own. So I mean, just offering a number of educational opportunities in exchange for, their help with the maintenance. And then, finally, like resume builders, definitely, give people titles. People like that, like they're the executive manager of this, of such and such fruit orchard, or just some kind of, benefit that they can actually be proud of and be more invested into. And then it's really important to outreach in your community, and we talk. I mean, it's an easy way to outreach, which is a lot of social media we do, which is great. A lot of Facebook, Twitter. It's good to have websites and newsletters. You really want to get the word out about your orchard, and it's really easy. You just go onto like idealist.org or Good Food Jobs and just kind of post a opening for like a social media specialist, and you'll be amazed by how many people are actually going to apply to want to help you with your social media. But then you need to recognize that, especially in DC, a lot of these communities are changing. We're experiencing, a lot of gentrification, a lot of, exclusion, where, people, definitely people who are less tech savvy or less, don't have computers are being left out. So you definitely want to go beyond like the social media, where you actually want to, recognize, what is like a digital divide, and recognize there are people out there. Not everyone's on Twitter, not everyone's on Facebook, so you want to reach those people too. So, I mean, a lot of that's just like good old-fashioned, going out and using flyers and posters are really great. But really just tapping into the pre-existing networks and into these communities. Like a lot of these churches, a lot of these rec centers, already had these amazing, networks of people that are living completely outside of social media. And if you can get into those networks and get them on board, you're going to have a whole lot of help, maintaining that fruit orchard. And definitely, find the right kind of community leader. Don't just go into a community and tell them what they should be doing. You need to, find the people that are considered the leaders in these communities, get them on board, get them interested in the benefits of this fruit orchard, and then have them sell this idea of this fruit orchard to the community, instead of just, going door to door in a completely different neighborhood that no one knows you, and you don't know where everyone's coming from. And then like outreach events, is really great. Like our favorite outreach event is a combination of a cookout and a moon bounce. where you get all the kids out for the moon bounce, and then the adults, come for the food, and just bring them out there and then start talking to them about what this orchard is about, and what benefits that that they can get from this orchard. And then, just a lot of educational programs, like a lot of workshops, train-the-trainer programs. And we even recommend, doing, getting people, because outreaching isn't just like one time and then you're done outreaching. Outreaching is something that needs to be done every year to really, because it takes years before you really get into the middle of the communities. So I definitely recommend, trying to organize an outreach community that's from this cooperative group that's going to be constantly, getting into the community and constantly, telling people about the benefits of this orchard. And then once you have that investment, once you have that, enough people in the community on board, enough people that are making up your cooperative that are engaged in taking this orchard, you have to do events and you have to find different strategies to keep these people invested. And workshops is a big one. It's just the more educational programming that you can provide around this orchard, the more people are going to be coming in and are going to be engaged and excited about learning about this orchard while they're helping you maintain this orchard. Social events, cookouts and stuff. Yoga, if you can email any yoga center and say, hey, can you do some free yoga classes out in some park next to the orchard, and they're going to be all on board. Field trips from schools are definitely huge. But one thing that really keeps people engaged and really keeps people coming back and having fun is having a monthly newsletter. And this is to be something, if you get someone, going back to the social media specialist, if you can get someone on board to help you, kind of constantly build, social media support for your garden, that that monthly newsletter is going to remind people what you're doing and what it's about, and so continually getting people out. You can highlight members, highlight trees, highlight stories about in the community about people, the benefits we're getting to, just amazing, stories of people who really don't have, we work with a lot of people who have no access. They live in what's called food deserts, where they have no access to healthy foods. It's all corner stores, and if you can highlight a story about his family that's receiving fresh food, whether it's vegetables from the garden or fruit from the orchard, and what kind of difference that's making in that life. That's what those kind of stories is what's going to bring more people to your orchards, to your community projects, and what's going to not only bring more people but also bring investment and time and money. And it's the stories that really get people going about these community projects. And then one of our most successful programs, what we do, so we have one community garden. It's one of our larger community gardens called Wingard Gardens. It's a 3-acre community garden. It's got almost 50 trees, fruit trees, huge orchard, and we actually have an apprenticeship program where we you don't want to just wing this one. You really want to spend some time creating an educational structure center where people are actually going to weekly people can apply to become an apprentice. They have this list of expectations and requirements. Like, we're going to need you to water, once a week. We're going to need you to weed, once a month. These expectations in exchange. They can go through this structural educational program where they learn, so much about this fruit orchards, about these community gardens, about things like forest gardening, and it's a really great way to. The people are doing it. They really. The more time and more investment, or more you can build this educational structure, the more people you're going to have that's really excited about being a part of your garden. And then going back to, we talked about how we divide all our fruit trees into different maintenance categories, because we really want people to kind of understand, the difference between, from low maintenance and to high maintenance. And so this slide kind of outlines, what trees we're talking about. But these are most of the trees that do really well in the Mid-Atlantic, especially in DC. Especially the low maintenance. We really push these low maintenance trees. But unfortunately, not a lot of people know about pawpaw and persimmons and figs and service berries. But they're such amazing trees, and they need such little care that it's really if you're going for a really low maintenance orchard, I mean, these guys, make a really great orchard. Then when you go to medium maintenance, you're starting to deal with more pest issues. You're starting to deal with more pruning, like pears, like Asian pears are really fantastic in DC, but they do require a lot of pruning, and especially European pears can have some disease issues, and so definitely, just letting people know, like, the more familiar fruits that they get, like pears and fruit plums and cherries. Everyone loves these fruit trees, but at the same time, they could be a little bit more maintenance, especially like the higher maintenance. We find like apples and peaches are definitely like the ones that just require a whole lot of maintenance in the urban environment. So just letting people know. It's possible. It's definitely doable. If you have a school group that just love, like a lot of our schools that we plant these orchards at will tell people. We'll tell people, we'll survey the class, the students, and ask them what their favorite fruit is. And if everyone says an apple tree or a peach tree, we definitely don't want to scare people away from that. We want them to be invested into these trees, but at the same time, we want to kind of push them towards the lower maintenance, trees. And then there's a couple of really simple, like low maintenance designs that just makes the maintenance of these orchards are really so much easier. One of them is just using living mulches. A lot of these trees need to constantly be mulched, remulched. Typically people use that hard shredded hardwood bark mulch. They use a lot of times they have to reapply these mulches 2-3 times a year just to keep the benefits of mulch. Having that water, keeping the soil moist, the water retention, the soil release of food, things like that. But we're really encouraging more forest garden styles, strategies, such as things like living mulches, like white clover. It takes a little while to actually seed the white clover, but if you can get that seeded, it works just as well as a mulch. It keeps the soil, it regulates the moisture levels in the soil. It's a nitrogen fixer, so it adds nitrogen. And at the same time, you're not going to have to constantly find new sources and people to help you remulch all the time. So things like that really help. Like if you got in the soil in the city, we're dealing with some really horrible soils. Most of it's a lot of it's really compacted soil. So we definitely encourage like winter cover cropping with like daikon radishes or these huge white radishes that just drill through some really hard compacted soil, and can really just by planting those around your orchard, you can really kind of remediate the soil a lot better. Eric talked a lot about beneficial attractors and pest deterrents, like using like elderberry, different flowering, native flowering plants to attract, insects to your gardens. At the same time, using certain ones like chives and different alliums that they're annuals, that will do a really great job, keeping certain pests away. But definitely, I recommend if you go in a forest garden style, not a lot of people in the city really know about forest gardens, and they don't know about clover. Like we have this all the time, where some community members come out and they're really excited and they want to help weed the garden, and they'll go and just weed all our clover, and then we'll show up an hour later and they're like smiling, super excited, so you definitely want to put like signs saying like don't weed the clover, as much educational signage about what is happening, like these are daikon radishes, this is an elderberry, this is what the benefits that it's bringing to your orchard, so as much as possible. And then if you can afford irrigation systems, that's really great. Having some kind of drip, solar pumps are fantastic. If you don't have access to electricity, you can get a really nice solar pump for like $500. But definitely, if you do that, coordinate with your Department of Public Works, so they know not to run over your drip tapes, which has happened quite often with our DPW. Yeah, and that's I think that's about all the time I have. I think we can do some questions. People have some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Josh. So as we're waiting for some of these questions to come up, let me ask you a few. 3,000 orchards in DC? Is that what you said?
I said 3 dozen.
3 dozen? Oh, I was going to say.
Sorry about that. A little bit less than 3,000.
A little bit less, I see. And in some municipalities don't like actually supporting fruit and food forests on public lands. How did you get, or how did someone get DC to be supportive of that?
Well, I think with public land, I mean, you have to definitely engage the community. You have to, show that there's enough community support for this orchard, that this is what the community wants. And again, it's going beyond that social media and going door to door, getting people, posters with survey information, like going to community meetings, going to churches, finding the network and just recording as much as possible, and then bringing that to say, like, for DC, Parks and Rec, showing that if there's enough community support for this fruit orchard, then you're more likely to actually get this, get this to happen.
So how are the majority of the projects funded?
Well, for a lot of these projects, I mean, we have a really great, tree nonprofit called Casey Trees, and that's in DC. That actually is an endowment that uses a lot of their funds to provide free trees for DC. So we're able to get a lot of free, fruit trees through this organization. And then, like a lot of it too, if the community wants to come together and they want to, that's why if you can use pre-existing community gardens, most of these gardens, collect plot dues, and they have some funds, or maybe able to, apply for some kind of grant, as a community garden entity to hopefully get some future funds where they could purchase the trees.
And where does one get something like white clover? I mean, how does one seed it, or do you transplant it if you wanted to put something like that as a ground cover under the trees?
Yeah, so white clover, I mean, you can get that at any, seed company. Like we get it, like Johnny Seed Select has really great prices on just ordering white clover, and especially if you want to order bulk. And white clover is pretty easy. After you're done planting the tree, you just take a hard rake and kind of scuffle the surface of the ground, and then just take a handful of the seeds and just like kind of shake it, almost like you're dancing a little bit or keeping a beat, and just like shake your hand, and just kind of lightly broadcast the seeds, over the area, and then lightly cover that over, water once, and maybe put some straw on top or something, just for once. And once it takes a little while to get established, but once it gets established, it stays for a long time.
There's another question. What % of a full-time employee do you think it takes to build a community orchard at an existing community garden? This person works for an urban forestry nonprofit, and they're trying to budget out a program expansion, including urban orchards.
So what % full-time employee? I mean, a lot of our programs, like at DC Parks and Rec, we don't have a budget to like hire people to take care of these community gardens and these orchards. So that's why we create or help or look for cooperative models that can that are where the community can actually maintain indefinitely. And a lot of this, if you could find the pre-existing community models, the pre-existing community gardens, and work with them, that's going to take a very low amount of percentage. That's more about just kind of organizing the people that are already organized. So that'd be a small percentage of a full-time employee. But if you have to, say you don't have these pre-existing cooperatives, but you have some land, or you have an opportunity to do an orchard. So that's going to take a lot more time. I mean, you're going to have to outreach that neighborhood. You're going to have to find the people in that neighborhood that are interested and are ready to be invested into this cooperative. You have to kind of train them, organize them, and then help them. Whether you can maybe if you have the funding, great. If not, there's a lot of grants that you can look for. There's a lot of Kickstarters. IOBI is a really great crowdsourced fundraiser that's helping from New York, that helps a lot of urban ag projects. And that, if you're starting from scratch and you're making that, creating that whole cooperative, that's going to take, that's going to take a lot, big percentage of the time of a full-time employee. So it all depends. I definitely recommend finding these pre-existing cooperatives. But if not, you can do it, but it's just going to take a lot more time.
So do you go out and recruit participants to become fruit tree or food forest partners with you? And do you also plant a lot in food deserts?
Yeah, well, we definitely try to plant as much as possible in food deserts. We, as a park, DC Parks and Rec, we look for, establishing community gardens as many different places experiencing food insecurity as possible. And then it's not that much. Once we have the garden, we'll definitely ask the community, if they want that, if they want an orchard with that garden. So we and I do a lot of outreaching. I do a lot of going to different community meetings and like I said, churches and hot, and different schools and rec centers and yeah, I'd say a big part of my job is just outreaching and finding the people, because we're not going to plant. I mean, that's the thing. If you don't have a community that's supporting your project, it's not going to be a successful project. I mean, just planting a fruit orchard. I mean, there's tons of places that we can plant a fruit orchard just by space-wise, but we need to find the communities that are ready. They're tired of not having access to this, to healthy and affordable food, and these are the people. And if we can organize them, and then only then, once we have a decent cooperative of community members, will we plant the orchard.
And another question, do you have experience revitalizing older and neglected community orchards, or do you mostly put in new ones?
We mostly put in new ones, but we do, yeah, there's a couple really old orchards that we've I'm not an expert at that, but I definitely, just going in there and pruning the heck out of them is like, and really putting some, getting some more compost and things, and just getting everything, everything in there, going again. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't be an expert about that subject.
Okay, and I think that we do have some information. Maybe Susan Poisner, I believe, might have put together a video helping us understand how to reclaim older, abandoned or neglected community orchards. So if we can find that, we can put that out on the Google group as well. Well, let me again thank both Josh and Eric for fabulous presentations. There's lots to discuss. As you can see now on your screen, we've got 2 more webinars scheduled, so mark them down on your calendar. And we start at 1 o'clock on Eastern Time. And you see the TBD, we're still looking for what we call stories from the field. That is your own stories about your organization and your efforts in your community. So if you would like to present in the place where Josh presented today, please contact orchard@actrees.org and let us know. We'd love to schedule you there. We are, again, delighted. Eric and Josh, thanks so much. There's much to talk about. Also, if you out there in webinar land have ideas for topics you would like us to cover over the coming year, please let us know. We will be sending you a link to this recorded webinar as well, so you can look at it again, get information you might have missed, share it with your friends. Max, behind the scenes at AC Trees, thank you so much. And to all of you who joined us, we had 101 people sign up. Usually that means almost everybody watches either now or in a recording, so our numbers are growing. We thank you all, and happy orcharding. Take care.